You're standing in your kitchen. The knife slips. A deep cut opens across your hand, and by the next morning, the skin around it is hot, swollen, and red. An infection. Today, this is nothing. A doctor, a course of antibiotics, a week of healing, and you forget it ever happened. Now take all of that away. No doctor, no pills, no hospital, not for 1,000 miles, and not for another 10,000 years, because hospitals don't exist yet. No anesthesia, no antibiotics, no surgeons. This is the world that every single one of your ancestors was born into. For 99% of human history, there was no such thing as a doctor. So here's a question almost nobody stops to ask. How did anyone survive? Most people picture prehistoric life as short and brutal. Everyone dead by 30, finished off by a scratch or a broken bone. But that number is a kind of illusion. The reason the average looks so low is that so many infants died, and all those early deaths dragged the average down with them. The people who made it through childhood often lived into their 60s, their 70s, and beyond, which only makes the mystery deeper. If a simple wound could turn deadly, and there were no doctors anywhere on Earth, how did so many ancient humans manage to grow old? When researchers dig up their skeletons and look closely, they don't find a species barely clinging to life. They find something far stranger. They find evidence of medicine, of surgery, of healing that should have been impossible. And the deeper they dig, the clearer it becomes. Ancient humans weren't simply surviving without doctors. They had worked out something we are only now beginning to understand again. It starts with a discovery in a cave in northern Spain. In 2017, a team led by Laura Weyrich at the University of Adelaide published a study in the journal Nature that quietly rewrote what we believed our ancient relatives were capable of. They had scraped the hardened plaque from the teeth of Neanderthals, who died around 48,000 years ago. And locked inside that plaque was a molecular record of the last things these individuals put in their mouths. One of them stood out. His jawbone showed a painful dental abscess. His gut carried a parasite that causes severe diarrhea. He was, by any measure, a sick man. And what researchers found in his teeth was astonishing. He had been eating poplar, a bark that contains salicylic acid. That is the active ingredient in aspirin, the very same painkiller sitting in your bathroom cabinet right now. And alongside it, traces of penicillin, the mold that tens of thousands of years later would give humanity its first antibiotic. Sit with that for a moment. A sick Neanderthal, in pain and fighting infection, was dosing himself with a natural painkiller and a natural antibiotic, more than 40,000 years before Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in a London laboratory. He couldn't read. He had no idea bacteria existed. And yet, somehow, he knew what to take. This wasn't luck, it was knowledge, and it ran far deeper than a single plant. Move forward in time to roughly 5,300 years ago, high in the Alps on the border of what is now Italy and Austria. In 1991, two hikers stumbled onto a body frozen in the ice. A man so perfectly preserved that researchers could read the state of his health like a medical chart. We call him Ötzi. Ötzi was not a well man. His joints were worn, his stomach was troubled, and his intestines were infested with whipworm, a parasite that brings cramping and pain. But he was not defenseless against it. Tucked into his gear, researchers found pieces of birch polypore, a fungus with antibacterial and anti-parasitic properties, almost perfectly suited to the very infection he was carrying. He wasn't gathering it to eat. He was carrying his own medicine. And then there were the tattoos, 61 of them inked across his body, and when researchers mapped them, a pattern jumped out. These weren't decoration. They clustered over his arthritic joints, his lower back, his knees, his ankles, the exact places that would have hurt. And many of them line up almost precisely with points still used in acupuncture today. More than 5,000 years ago, someone was treating this man's chronic pain with a technique we would recognize on sight. This is the part that's easy to overlook. To an ancient human, the entire world was a pharmacy, willow bark for fever and aches, the same source that aspirin would eventually come from. Honey packed into an open wound where its natural acidity strangles bacteria. A remedy written into Egyptian medicine and still used in hospitals today. Bog moss pressed against a cut as a clean, absorbent, slightly antiseptic bandage. None of it was written down. All of it was learned the hard way, across thousands of years, one painful experiment at a time, and then guarded and passed from parent to child as some of the most valuable knowledge a person could possess. Knowing which leaf to chew and which to avoid was, quite literally, the difference between life and death. But knowing which plant to swallow is one thing. What ancient humans were willing to do next is almost impossible to believe. They performed surgery. All across the ancient world, in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, researchers keep unearthing the same unsettling object: a human skull with a clean, deliberate hole cut into it. The procedure is called trepanation, and it is the oldest surgery we have any evidence for. Someone would take a sharpened sliver of flint or obsidian and scrape, cut, or bore straight through a living person's skull, most likely to relieve pressure after a head injury or to treat seizures and crushing headaches. It sounds like certain death. It wasn't. Here is how we know. When bone is cut and the patient dies, the edges of the hole stay sharp and raw. But when the patient survives, the bone fights back. It begins to heal, the rim growing smooth and rounded over months and years. And across hundreds of these skulls, that is exactly what researchers find: healing. At a single burial site in France dating back about 6,500 years, 40 out of 120 skulls show signs of trepanation. The cognitive neuroscientist Charles Gross put the survival rate somewhere between 50 and 90%. In ancient Peru, in the best periods, it reached as high as 91%. To put that in perspective, during the American Civil War, brain surgery performed in a hospital killed roughly half the patients on the table. Stone Age surgeons, with no antiseptic and no anesthetic, were beating those odds. And then there is the discovery that stunned even the experts. In 2022, an archaeologist named Tim Maloney of Griffith University in Australia reported a finding in Nature from a cave in Borneo. His team had uncovered the skeleton of a young person who died around 31,000 years ago. The lower part of the left leg was simply gone, and not broken, not torn off by an animal. Cut, cleanly amputated, and it had happened in childhood. That alone would be remarkable, but the bone told the rest of the story. It had healed. This child survived the amputation and went on to live another 6 to 9 years. 31,000 years ago, in the Ice Age, someone cut through a child's leg, through skin, muscle, blood vessels, and nerve, and kept the wound clean enough to escape a fatal infection. And the child walked away and grew up. Even now, with sterile operating theaters and modern drugs, amputation is dangerous. They managed it in the Stone Age, and the patient lived. But the deepest secret of how ancient humans survived isn't a plant. It isn't a surgery. It isn't a sharpened piece of flint at all. It's each other. Return to a cave called Shanidar in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, where in 1957 the archaeologist Ralph Solecki uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal who lived around 45,000 years ago. Researchers call him Shanidar 1, and his skeleton reads like a catalog of disaster. A crushing blow to the head that probably blinded his left eye. A withered right arm lost at the elbow. Damage to his leg that left him limping. And bony growths inside his ear canals that would have left him almost completely deaf. By every brutal rule of survival in the Ice Age, this man should have died young. Half-blind, one-armed, deaf, and lame. He couldn't have hunted, couldn't have heard a predator closing in, couldn't have fended for himself for a single day. And yet, according to the anthropologist Eric Trinkhaus, who has spent decades studying these bones, Shanidar 1 lived into old age. Every one of his injuries had healed. There was only one explanation. Someone cared for him for years. The others in his group fed him, sheltered him, protected him, and kept him alive long after he could give anything back. They refused to leave him behind. This is the answer hidden inside the bones. There is an old observation in anthropology that the first true sign of human civilization isn't a tool or a weapon or a fire. It's a healed thigh bone. Because in the wild, a broken femur is a death sentence. You can't run. You can't gather food. You become something else's meal. For that bone to knit back together, someone had to stay. Someone had to carry you and feed you and stand guard over you for weeks while you couldn't move. A healed femur means somebody decided you were worth not abandoning. That was the very first medicine. Long before drugs, before surgery, before the word doctor had ever been spoken, there was a simple decision to care for someone who was suffering. So how did ancient humans survive without doctors? The truth is they never survived without medicine. They invented it, molecule by molecule, chewing bark until they found the one that dulled the pain. Plant by plant, learning which fungus fought infection and which one would kill. cut by careful cut until a human hand holding a piece of stone could open a skull or take a limb, and the person on the other end of it would live. And beneath all of it, older than any of it, ran the simplest technology of all, the instinct to look at another person in agony and decide that they were worth saving. So the next time you swallow a painkiller or get stitched back together or recover from something that would have ended your great-great-grandparents' lives, remember where it truly comes from. It isn't only the pill or the surgeon or the hospital, it's a chain of knowledge and care stretching back tens of thousands of years, kept alive by people who had no medicine but each other. They didn't survive without doctors. In every way that mattered, they were the doctors. And the care that kept them alive all those years ago is still to this day the oldest and most powerful medicine we have.